On the edge of the Fertile Crescent, the cradle of civilization, in southeastern Turkey, massive limestone pillars rise into the air. These multi-ton blocks once formed majestic, open-air enclosures. They were erected nearly 12,000 years ago, during the New Stone Age, when humans still lived as hunter-gatherers. Before Gobeklitepe,
Dear guests, I would like to invite our moderator and the panelists to take their seats.
To civilization and religion.
Our moderator for the session is OZALP BIROL,
But this site,
Director General of Pera Museum,
turning that theory on its head.
and our panelists are Associate Professor ÇİİDEM Maner, Koç University,
All pitches. In the small
and
fraction
Dr. CLARE, researcher from German Archeology Institute. Mr. Birol, the floor is yours. Söz sizin, buyurun. Nasıl isterseniz, tabii ki.
Değerli dostlar, Göbeklitepe paneline hepiniz hoş geldiniz. Teşekkürler. Yeni bir dünya düzenine doğru ilerlerken insan odaklı kalkınma konusunu seçerek insana öncelik veren ve bu bağlamda kapsayıcılık, teknoloji, etik ve yönetişim konularına odaklanan 10. Boğaziçi Zirvesi'ni düzenleyenleri ve bu etkinliğe emeği geçen tüm kişi ve kurumları yürekten kutlarım ve hepsine teşekkür ederim. Bugün iki çok değerli konuşmacımız, Koç Üniversitesi'nden doçent doktor ÇİİDEM Maner ve Alman Archeology Enstitüsü'nden doktor CLARE, uluslararası toplumun ortak miras konsepti gereksinimini bu entegrasyon sürecinde Anadolu'nun yeri ve rolü ve insanlığın muhteşem ortak kültür mirası Göbeklitepe'nin karakteristik özellikleri üzerinden önümüzdeki 1 saat boyunca Göbeklitepe konusunda bizlere yeni ufuklar açacaklar. Boğaziçi Zirvesi 2019'un bu oturumunda moderatör olmamı benden çok değerli dostum, eski bankacı ve iş insanı, yeni arkeolog ve tarihçi Ali Ertönü kardeşim rica etti. Ben de iki değerli konuşmacının yer alacağı bu oturumu yönetmek üzere bugün sizlerle birlikteyim. 35 yıldır iş dünyasının içinde olan ve bunun 25 yılını kültür ve sanat alanında geçiren bir işletmeci ve konuya duyarlı bir vatandaş olarak Göbeklitepe'yi inceleme alanına almış bir insanım. Bundan 15 yıl önce Amsterdam'dan İstanbul'a dönmek üzere havalimanında beklerken oturduğum kafede yanıma gelen genç bir garsonla sohbet ediyordum. Kalkarken kendisine bahşiş verdiğimde bu bahşişler çok işime yarayacak. Para biriktirip en kısa sürede Türkiye'ye gideceğim ve Göbeklitepe'yi göreceğim dediğinde şaşırmış ve açıkçası utanmıştım. Zira biz iş dünyasının kısır döngüsü içinde debelenip dururken ve kendi ülkemizdeki böyle bir değerle ilgilenmeyi hep gelecek zamanlara bırakırken o genç insan kısıtlı olanaklarına rağmen çoktan programını yapmıştı. Bu dersten sonra ben de Göbeklitepe'yi ve Göbeklitepe kültürünü merakla takip eden bir insan oldum. Bizlere döneminin inanç dünyasını, düşünsel zenginliğini ve toplumsal düzeni anlamamızı sağlayan şaşırtıcı çeşitlilikte ve zenginlikte bulgular ve buluntular veren bu muhteşem kültür varlığımıza yeni ışıklar tutacağını düşündüğüm bu ilginç paneli başlatmadan önce 1995 yılından aramızdan ayrıldığı 2014 yılına kadar Gobeklitepe'de özveriyle çalışan Sayın Profesör Doktor Klaus Schmidt'i saygıyla anıyor, başta kendisine ve sonra da değerli eşi ÇİİDEM Köksal Schmidt'e ve Gobeklitepe çalışmalarına emek veren tüm kişi ve kurumlara huzurlarınızda teşekkür ediyorum. Şimdi sözü fazla uzatmadan değerli konuşmacılarımıza vermek istiyorum. Kendilerini arzu ederlerse kendileri çok kısaca tanıtırlar ya da doğrudan konuya girerler. Zaten konuştukları zaman ne kadar engin akademik ve saha tecrübeleri olduğunu, deneyimleri olduğunu sizler de göreceksiniz. Önce Sayın Lee Clare ile başlayalım. Dear Lee Clare, the podium is yours, please.
Okay, I'll just set the microphone up. This is the correct machine, I think. Okay, thank you very much for allowing me to speak today. I've come to you today to speak to you about the site of Gobeklitepe, as we've heard. Obviously, it's a site which this year is obviously very present in the media, it being Gobeklitepe year. But I really want to take this opportunity to bring to your attention the significance of the site. So today I'm going to give you a little sort of summary of the meaning of the site, why it's become a UNESCO World Heritage Site last year, and why it's so important for not just for us archaeologists, but also for the public. So, first of all, as an archaeologist, it's always important, if you have a find or a site, to consider the context of that find or that site. And with Gobeklitepe, it's no different. So this slide here is just giving you a little sort of a breakdown of where Gobeklitepe belongs in a chronological and, to a certain extent, cultural sense. You can see that the site itself dates to around 9,500, so 9,500, to around 8,000 BC, so about 11,000 years old. It was in use, or was being built, for around 1,500 years. That's like from today back to the 6th century. So it's a very long-lived site. And this site was founded, you could say, in a period referred to as the pre-pottery Neolithic, which starts around 9,500, 9,600 BC. Now the Neolithic, I think most of you are aware, is a period when hunter-gatherer communities became sedentary, started farming, and took on the life ways that we now know today. So this is a very crucial time in world history, and Gobeklitepe belongs to an early part in this sequence. But we shouldn't forget that the process of Neolithization, this process of becoming farmers, happened over a long period of time, from around 10,000 BC to around 7,000 BC, we could say, so 3,000 years. And of course, during the course of those 3,000 years, different innovations came in. People became sedentary. The hunters and gatherers that previously were wandering around, hunting and gathering wild crops, hunting wild animals, became sedentary. Later on, plants and animals became domesticated, and they started farming them. And even later still, innovations such as pottery came in, when we have the pottery Neolithic from about 7,000 BC. So you shouldn't forget that Gobeklitepe is part of a larger picture. And that's what's happened quite often in the past years, in fact, you could say. That Gobeklitepe has been put forward as the main sort of answer to all the questions, how we became sedentary, how we became Neolithic, how we started farming. And we have to see it as one component in a larger mechanism. And of course, just before we carry on, you can see here oops, oh that's funny, okay. The map at the top shows you the Fertile Crescent, and Gobeklitepe, of course, lies in the northern part of that, in Upper Mesopotamia. Shortly and briefly to the history and the research history of the site. It would be unfair for me to stand here now and say this is all my work. It's not the case, obviously, I'm not that old. because the site itself was first discovered in the 1960s in the frame of a survey project when archaeologists were working in southeastern Anatolia looking for new sites, Neolithic sites. And Gobeklitepe was first discovered during this survey work, which was undertaken in a project by the University of Istanbul and also the Orient Institute in Chicago. And the two names important in this respect are Braidwood and Halet Chambel. And then in the 1990s, mid-1990s, in the meantime the site had been more or less forgotten. It was recorded, but excavations didn't take place. Then in the mid-1990s, Klaus Schmidt returned to the site and realized the potential of this site for Neolithic research. And together with his doctor father, as we say in German, Doktorvater, he worked with Harald Hauptmann, and they, together with the Schandaufer Museum, initiated excavations at Gobeklitepe. Looking at the location, Gobeklitepe, as you probably know, lies in the province of Schandaufer, not far from the city of Schandaufer itself, about 12-13 kilometers to the east, on high ground referred to as the Germosh Mountains or Germosh Dalare, and you can see the white dot there, and it's north of the Haran Plain, a large fertile plain in this part of the country. This is a picture of the site before excavations commenced in the mid-1990s. You can see at the time it was a large mound that was being farmed by the local farmers in this area upon a limestone plateau. And as you can imagine, from this point, 770 meters above sea level, you have fantastic views on a good day when you have good weather and clear visibility. To the north, you can see the northern Taurus Mountains. To the east, the Karajada Mountain, and to the south, as I mentioned, the Haran Plain stretching down towards the Syrian border about 50 kilometers further to the south. So it's a fantastic site to visit, not just for the archaeology, but also, of course, for the nature. Briefly then, we'll carry on the research history in a way. On the right-hand side, you can see the site, a photograph of the site taken a few years back before the new shelters were constructed. We have now shelters at the site. I'll show you those in a moment to protect the site. But here you can see the main excavation area on the far side. I don't think this is working very well. Okay, on the far side, on the right-hand side, a large excavation area. This is a main excavation area where excavations first commenced in the mid-1990s. And in 2009, excavations then continued and were extended to the northwestern part of the site, which are those trenches on the top left of the picture there. And on the left-hand side, you can see a map of the main excavation area, so on the right-hand side, with 4 of these large special buildings which were discovered and excavated by Klaus Schmidt since 1995. And of course, just to refresh your memory, in 2018 we became a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and this year, 2019, is Gobeklitepe year. This has brought a lot of change for us, obviously. Especially, I've been running around to giving lots of lectures about the site with my colleagues, and we have an increase in visitors to Gobeklitepe. Now we have this wonderful new shelter so that the visitors can actually walk around the site and see it from all perspectives. Of course, it's not easy for those of us working down in the trenches. It gets very loud at times, and we're frequently asked to move to make space so that people can take their photographs. But we don't do that anymore. So, as I said, special buildings with the famous T-shaped pillars. Here's the first few pictures of those. So a total of 8 of these special buildings has so far been discovered at Gobeklitepe, labelled A to H in the order of their discovery. So the first one excavated in the mid-1990s, and the last one discovered in 2010, so that's building H, which is in the northwestern part of the site. And here's a map, so you can see the location of these buildings. So we have A, B, C, D, and G, more or less in the main excavation area. F is on top of a mound in the center. E is down here in the southwest. It's not actually preserved, it's just the foundations, or the carved foundations in the rock plateau, and H is up in the northwest. So what are the characteristics of these buildings? I think you've noticed the T-pillars. That's obviously one of those characteristics. But first of all, most of the buildings have a round over ground plan. And at the center, we have two very large pillars, up to 5.5 meters in height, carved from one piece of limestone, which are slotted into pedestals. The floor of this building is actually the smooth bedrock, so the buildings are constructed directly upon the bedrock. And around the building, we have the building itself, the round oval shape, and in the walls of the building at regular intervals, we have smaller T-pillars, about 2.5 meters to 3 meters in height. Many or some of the pillars are decorated. I think you've seen pictures of them with low and high reliefs of animals. But the T-pillars themselves, and this is most interesting, is they're actually representations of the human being. If you can see here on this slide, you can see the hands placed on the stomach. Underneath that you have a belt, and below that a loincloth made of fox fur. And this is the right hand, or the eastern pillar in building D, where you can see at the bottom the podest it's actually stood in is decorated with these birds at the bottom. And of course these pillars were quarried by these early Neolithic people. Don't forget, these were hunter-gatherers. They had no metal. They were using stone tools, wooden tools, bone tools to actually, for everyday chores and tasks. And with these tools, they were also obviously quarrying these T-pillars from the surrounding plateau. And this one here is actually still in situ, as we say. It's still in the plateau. They started carving it, trying to remove it, and for some reason decided to leave it where it was. Perhaps it broke, or they didn't want to move it, I don't know. But this is a snapshot in history, or in prehistory. This is an activity which took place some 10,000 years ago. Now we have various reconstructions of the site of Gobeklitepe, and the most recent is below, but the top one is one from National Geographic, which was done in 2011. And the bottom one is from 2017. Now, in the past four years or so, we've had new insights into the site, and we have this new reconstruction. Things have changed. So the buildings themselves, we now know, were not as portrayed at the top. They probably were roofed over. They were multi-phase buildings. And more importantly, the site was not just a purely ritual site, but was part of a larger settlement. So that people were actually living at this site. They weren't actually going there just for ritual purposes, as was proposed earlier by Klaus Schmidt. And we have good archaeological evidence for that. So let's take a look at it. First of all, we go into the special buildings, the T-pillar buildings. We now know that these buildings were multi-phase. We know from new radiocarbon ages that they were long-lived buildings, perhaps centuries even. They were rebuilt, 2 or 3 different phases. The T-pillars were recycled, the building material was recycled. Really a long-lived building. And these buildings actually more or less were in use through the entire duration of occupation at Gobeklitepe. Then we come to the houses, which you can see behind. On the bottom picture there, you can see the houses, the domestic dwellings, as it were. This is the northwest area, so not the main excavation area, the northwest area on the western side of the picture, as I showed you earlier. This is a vertical photograph of that area. You can see here the plan, the stone plan. Here is in building H, the blue circle. And we have these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 boxes. Now those 5 boxes are deep soundings, excavation trenches, which we excavated in preparation for the construction of the shelter. Of course, the shelter had to be the foundations had to be dug, and we had to remove the archaeology before that was done. And in these trenches, we found some very interesting features, architecture. And we're going now to number 5, I think, because in number 5, this is where we have good evidence for these domestic houses, these buildings where the people were actually living as early as the earliest phase of the site, from the PPNA, the pre-Pottery Neolithic age, from around the mid-10th millennium BC. And you can see these small structures, which are quite typical of buildings for this period, domestic buildings. You can see on the right-hand side the types of finds were recovered from this area, including stone beads and bone beads made from small bones of birds. So the whole production, the chaîne opératoire, is we have from the site here, and also bone tools, which are also quite domestic, which come in large numbers from this area, and a fireplace in this activity zone. And if we compare it to other sites, this is the site of Jebel Ahmar, which is in northern Syria. You can see that it's very similar, and all these green dots here, you can see Gobeklitepe in the middle, all the green dots are PPNA domestic sites, so it's one of many, as I pointed out earlier. And many visitors to Gobeklitepe always sort of look into the big buildings, but they forget to look the other way and to look at the rectangular buildings behind, because they're equally as interesting. One interesting point is a transition from round building, so you see the round buildings in the PPNA, and around 8,700 BC, we enter the PPNB, and at this time we have a transition from round buildings to rectangular buildings. So at this point in time, one might say that the people actually discovered the corner in architecture. And it's very interesting, Gobeklitepe, we have this transition in the archaeology. You can see here a building, room 16. It was originally a round building, as you can see from the plaster floor, but at a later point in time, they changed the shape into a rectangular building. And here's the round floor, half of the round floor excavated within this rectangular building. So this is important also for the entire region when we're looking at this transition from round to rectangular architecture. And of course, one question has always been, do you have any dead bodies? Are there any skeletons? Of course we have skeletons, but burials were pretty rare until quite recently. We're very lucky that during the building work we had to excavate a drainage channel for the new shelter at the main excavation site. And we were lucky enough, it's a very small excavation trench, but in that trench we found the remains of a rectangular building from the early PPNB, about 8,700, 8,600 BC. And in it, this kidney-shaped pit. And it was, that looks very suspicious, looks rather like a grave. And in fact, we went down and we did have our first grave at the site. As we would expect, inside the building, in this period, PPNA, PPNB, it's quite characteristic that the dead are actually not buried in a cemetery away from the settlement site, but are actually sort of buried under the floor of the building. So, you know, Granny dies and you open up a hole and put her in under your living room, as it were. This is a close association with the dead and the ancestors, one might say. In this drainage channel, in this burial, we had 3 individuals, 2 females and possibly 1 male or female, the long bones piled to one side. So a very interesting feature for us, and we're very happy to find this evidence of these dwellers, of these people that lived at the site, you know, so many thousands of years ago, 10,000 years ago, at least. And of course now, if we think it's a settlement, the people would have needed water. And one of the reasons that Klaus Schmidt always said this must have been just a ritual site, people couldn't have lived there, is the fact there's no river or there's no water source, as it were, at the site, at least not today. Up on the plateau, there's no river, obviously. There may have been springs, but we have no confirmation of that yet. But what people were doing at this time was they were harvesting the rainwater. They had cisterns and they were collecting the rainwater in big pits. And recently, in this northwestern part of the site, in this deep sounding, we found this wonderful, what we think could have been a cistern. You can see here a very deep pit carved into the rock, into the limestone rock, some 8 meters in diameter and 3 meters deep. And we think this could have possibly been used for rainwater collection and for providing water for the community. And there may be many more of these. You can see it here. One interesting feature is this pit has what appears to be a corbelled roof, so it could have been domed over, and this would have been the first real evidence for a dome for this corbelled roofing that we ever have anywhere. So this is a very important new result from Gobeklitepe. On a final point, I know I'm running out of time, but I really want to stress that Gobeklitepe and these buildings were not temples. It's very often said the world's first temples. I admit it's a great way of gaining attention to the site, but I think this would be too little. They were ritual places, ritual buildings, I admit, but they had more functions than that. And I think once again, we have to look at the context of these buildings. And if we imagine that these people that built these structures were going through this transition from hunter-gathering to farming, you know, things start to happen. Challenges start to crop up. So, you know, they become sedentary. They're living permanently at the site, or at least semi-permanently at the site. And if you're living somewhere permanently, then of course you have more children. The population grows. With population growth comes more stress on the local resources, on the hunting grounds, on the plant resources. Territoriality increases. You have people gathering more and collecting more, surplus accumulation, and social incipient hierarchization of society. All of these things were happening at this time. And then, of course, you have heightened competition and the potential for conflict. And of course, for me, these buildings that we see here are not just ritual buildings, but they are places where these conflicts could have been mitigated. If we take a look again at the shape, the round, oval shape, the T-pillars are human beings. This is a meeting, a toplanta, as you'd say. It's a meeting point, and they're discussing what's going on, and it's a way of just keeping the group together in the face of these new challenges. And of course, the ancestors were important. We have finds of skulls, skull fragments, which are scratch marks on. We think we're talking about ancestors, a common narrative, and a way of actually stressing that is also via the ancestors. The fact that the group belongs together, they have common ancestors from this land. And of course, certain individuals who were buried, afterwards they went back in and they actually exhumed and took out the skull of that person, of important people perhaps. They were cleaned. We can see that from scratch marks used due to flint scraping, and then these things were probably displayed. So all very important, and we see the same in the statuary. They were actually decapitating heads. They had this preoccupation. They were obsessed with the human head. Of course, the human head is a seat of knowledge, and I think they're perhaps trying to sort of, make sure that knowledge wasn't lost when the person died. And of course, these narratives are seen on the pillars. You've seen many pictures of these pillars, I think, before, and these aren't just pictures of the animals and the things that were roaming the landscape when these people were living in the region. We've got vultures, snakes, scorpions. These are actually stories, they're narratives, foundation myths. This is what is keeping the group together. And of course, once again, this is not the only T-pillar site in the region. There are so many more T-pillar sites in the Şanlıurfa region which are known from surface survey. And we have excavations at Gobeklitepe, Nevali Çoyit at the top there was excavated in the 1980s, 90s, and we now have new excavations down here to the south at Harbetsuvan and Karahantepe. So this is an evolving Neolithic landscape that we are very keen to carry on studying, and we look forward to new results that are coming in. So I must end there, and I'd like to thank so many people, but of course, most of all, the General Directorate of Cultural Assets and Museums, the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, that we are allowed to work there, and of course, the wonderful cooperation with the Şanlıurfa Museum, our funding body, the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft, the German Research Foundation in Germany. So thank you very much.
Evet, hakikaten CLARE çok güzel bir sunum, çok güzel bir prezentasyon yaptı. Gerçekten yeni ışıklar tuttu. Şimdi aynı konuya farklı bir yaklaşımla belki biraz daha kısa zamanda odaklanmak üzere, kendisi öyle dedi çünkü bana, Sayın ÇİİDEM Maner hanımefendiyi huzurlarınıza davet ediyorum. Buyurun efendim, kürsü sizin.
Hello, I'm ÇİİDEM Maner from Koç University and the Department of Archeology and History of Art. And my presentation is quite short. It's more like a debate where I thought maybe it can open the floor for some discussion. These are also including observations of my own fieldwork, which I have been conducting in Anatolia for 25 years. So it's an accumulation actually of problems. The use of archaeology as an economic asset can have negative and positive aspects. Tourism can prevent looting. The jobs and revenue that archaeology provides to people can be powerful motivations to preserve sites and materials. Public and community archaeology projects, education of children, are important parameters in the long run to create a sustainable and diligent protection of an archaeological site. However, the commercialization of archaeology for tourism can have negative effects on the physical fabric of sites, its sustainable preservation, and its communities. The danger lies in a Disneyfication of cultural values. The use of archaeology for gain can promote short-term benefits over long-time preservation. Archaeologists need to work closely with local stakeholders and vice versa. To reach the interest of tourists, communities, and public interest, easy understandable, informative texts need to be prepared with accurate information. Most of the time, the leading archaeologists of a site are not involved in marketing and tourism strategies and programs, and oftentimes they're not even consulted. A danger is hidden in this, as the interest in marketing and economic gain can lead to misinformation, which will harm the site, its preservation, and fame in the long run. Economic impacts can interact well with other values, for example, urban regeneration. Economic incentives are used to halt more destructive processes, such as the use of tourism to prevent looting. The ability of archaeology to act as an economic asset is one of the reasons people are willing to preserve a site or object and give resources to it. This is an important parameter during times of crisis and war. Communities which have an economic benefit from the archaeological site are eager to protect it during times of crisis. For some people, it is what gives archaeology value. Also, the undue promotion of an archaeological's values can also harm long-term preservation and other values. The future of heritage preservation is only partially rooted in marketing and economic gain. These parameters are not enough to create a long-term way of sustainable heritage protection and awareness. Education of communities, public, children, and university students are inevitable. The future of preserving archaeological sites lies in education. In the second half of the 20th century, the importance of including the community and the public and the preservation of archaeological sites has started to be discussed and applied. Nowadays, community and public archaeology are part of the archaeology discipline, though most of the time they're not included in the curricula of archaeology programs. However, much more emphasis should be given to them, as only the study of archaeological material is not enough to protect a site in the long run. The notion needs to be created, taught, and planted into the minds of children, students, local communities, as they are the future generations to apply heritage protection. What we refer to as community archaeology is the relationship between archaeologists and communities. Both the archaeologists and the community members should collaborate directly in the project. It involves working with communities in ways that value their opinions to meet their needs while also accomplishing archaeological goals. Generally, when new archaeological projects are implemented, scientific questions are the base for these projects. However, if the community is included in the archaeology project, it can enhance the protection of the site in the long run, also after the archaeologists have finished their work and left the site. Rural regeneration projects, such as restoring vernacular architecture, creating ecotourism, and helping the community in developing and producing local products to sell, are all creating a strong foundation for economic gain through the site for the community, which is living next to the site or close to the site. Marketing strategies are creating economic gain for companies which are mostly not related to the communities living by the site, but which are sometimes long distances away from the archaeological sites. These do not directly help the local communities to develop themselves and to benefit from the economic gain, which can lead to the destruction or looting of the site by the locals as they would oppose the foreign marketing companies. Hence, it is necessary to interact with the local communities for sustainable heritage protection and awareness. Public archaeology emerged in the 1970s and aims to create awareness and public participation in projects. The public is engaged in archaeology through lectures, interpretive science, tours of sites, websites, blogs, and excavations. It is the practice of presenting archaeological data and interpretations to the public. Public archaeologists also investigate the outcomes of the various innovative ways one can engage the public in archaeological research, both within archaeology and in terms of public awareness. Public archaeology involves a large variety of projects such as heritage education, cultural research management, websites, museums, ethics, cultural tourism, and so on. The education of children, starting from preschool in museums and schools, is oftentimes underestimated. Educational material, not only for children, but also for teachers, need to be developed and updated with the latest results of the excavations. In this case, the museums and educators need to work closely with the archaeologists. It would be constructive to see that marketing strategies include also the support, development, and advertisement of educational projects related to archaeology and cultural heritage preservation. Gobeklitepe is advertised and present in almost every medium in Turkey today, from mugs to panels at the airports, over reconstruction of the T-shaped pillars to T-shaped pillars made of glass, and so on. For brand making and advertisement, is mainly the visual part important? Is this a sustainable way for heritage protection? In my opinion, community and public archaeology and educational projects need to be supported financially, which have an economic gain from the archaeological sites through marketing. Besides just advertising a photo of the archaeological site and mentioning its beauty and uniqueness, why not advertise for the development of a public and community archaeology project, such as heritage education projects, the implementation of new education material, chairs and courses on public and community archaeologies at universities and municipalities. This is a more effective, impressive, and sustainable way, not only for protecting the cultural heritage site, but also a strong marketing strategy for economic gain, cultural tourism of a region, and the value of a country, a company, or a person shows to its own cultural heritage. Thank you.
Efendim, Sayın ÇİİDEM Maner de bizlere böyle önemli bir kültür varlığının markalaştırılması, pazarlama ve ticari eksende kamuya tanıtımı, kamuya nasıl iletişiminin nasıl kurulması, genç kuşaklara, gelecek kuşaklara bunun nasıl onları eğiterek aktarılması ya da aktarılması gerektiği hususunda son derece faydalı, kısa fakat özlü bir konuşma yaptı. Şimdi vaktimiz var. Soru cevap bölümüne geçmek istiyorum izin verirseniz. Ben sizleri ısıtmak adına konuşmaları dinlerken bir takım notlar da aldım. Hem daha önce okuduklarıma hem de bu notlara binaen birinci soruyu sorarak başlayayım izin verirseniz. Siz de lütfen bu çerçevede sorularınız varsa hazırlayın. Efendim, ben Sayın CLARE'e sormak istiyorum sorumu. Şimdi Gobeklitepe daha önce kazılmış ya da kazısı yapılmış diğer çanak çömleksiz diyelim Neolitik alanlardan, kazı alanlarından ya da yerleşim bölgelerinden daha önceki gözlükle bakarsak farklı olarak neredeyse kıraç diyebileceğimiz bir sırtın üzerinde ve dışarıdan bakıldığında çok da çekici olmayan bir yere konuşlanmış. Bölgede daha önce kazısı yapılmış olan bütün diğer yerleşimler ovada ya da suyun bol olduğu yerlerde konuşlanmış, kurulmuş. Her gelen oraya yerleşmiş. Acaba Göbeklitepe'nin böyle bir alana konuşlandırılmasında ya da burası kurulurken böyle bir yerin seçilmesinde sizce ne gibi faktörler etkin olmuş olabilir? Benim sorum bu. Neden böyle bir yere yerleşmiş bu insanlar?
Well, of course, the location is very prominent. It's a very prominent location. In fact, if you stand in the plain, you can actually see the site from kilometers away, in fact. So I think the reason that this site was chosen in the first place, and I think it's a very pragmatic sort of explanation, if you imagine that these groups were hunters and that they were keeping an eye on the animals which were living. I mean, obviously today the landscape around Gobeklitepe is pretty barren. There are no trees. There's mostly fields in the plain below, in the Haran plain. This is a cultural landscape which we're seeing. But in the Neolithic, 10,000, 11,000 years ago, this would have been quite different. The environment would have been characterized by a loose forest of wild pistachio, wild almond trees. There would have been different animals in the landscape, roaming the landscape, like aurochs, like wild boar, wild pig. And the most important animal for the hunters at the time was in fact the gazelle. And herds of gazelle would have roamed the steppe below, and I think Gobeklitepe would have been a wonderful vantage point for any hunter group actually observing the quarry, the prey that they were hunting. Of course, these hunting groups would have gone down into the plain. There's also some indication from a colleague, Bahatin Çelik, that in the landscape around, we could have evidence for actual traps for gazelle herds, where large numbers of animals were actually killed at once. So I think it's a very pragmatic reason. I think it's to do with the subsistence of hunters and gatherers.
Very good and logical definition of the situation. Thank you indeed. Efendim, şimdi sorular alalım. Sayın Mellard. Mikrofon, bir şey... Beyefendiye mikrofon verelim lütfen.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Do we have evidence for domestication of plants yet? Or is it just gathering?
We have no evidence for domesticated animals or plants at the moment from the site. And this is one of the reasons that I'm also very cautious when it comes to naming Gobeklitepe as the smoking gun for the Neolithic. Because of course, if the site of Gobeklitepe had caused the Neolithic, then I would expect to have domesticated animals and plants there, and we don't have them. So although Gobeklitepe is a very important site with these wonderful buildings, architecture, the symbolism, I think, and probably experimentation was going on with animals at the time, but of course it takes a while for the wild species to become morphologically domesticated. But that didn't happen at Gobeklitepe, not as far as we know yet. So watch this space.
So we have to wait. We have to look fast forward to Çatal to see some domesticated plants, etc.
We do have evidence for domesticates at Nevallichori, for example. There are sites dating to the PPNB, or the early PPNB, which do have mid-9th millennium, which do have domesticated species. And this is a question, why haven't we got them at Gobeklitepe? Because Gobeklitepe does go to around 8,000 BC. We would expect them there. Perhaps it was taboo. Perhaps there was other reasons why we're not seeing them at this site. That's something for the research.
Thank you.
Hemen başka soru beyefendiye.
Mehmet Emin Yıldız. Ben biraz aykırı soru soracağım. Birincisi, tarihin sıfır noktası nereden biliyorlar? Tarihin sıfır noktası 12 bin yıl önce mi, daha önce de var? Bu bir. İkincisi, şimdi bunu arkeologlar burayı araştırırken ne kadar insan ölmüştür bir kralın zevkini tatmin etmek için? Ne kadar analar, eşler, çocuklar ağlamıştır? Bunu da bir tespit ettiler mi acaba? Yani bir kral var, bunu yapacaksınız diyor. Şimdi biz o şeylerden bugüne bir ders çıkarmamız lazım. Gençlere dememiz lazım ki bakın o zaman zulüm vardı. Bir kralın keyfine şu kadar adam çalışmış, ölmüş. Hürriyetin kıymetini bilelim. Geldiğimiz noktanın kıymetini bilelim diye bir ders çıkarmamız lazım. Ben bunu göremedim burada. Bir başka şey, Göbeklitepe niye koymuşlar? Orada göbek falan yok. Taşlar var. Teşekkür ederim.
Efendim, sayın konuşmacılarımız bir yorum yapmak isterler mi? Evet. Burada yönetim erkin gücün kimde olduğunu da bilmiyoruz bu arada. Hani krallık filan derken. Ama mutlaka bu yorumunuzu da nazara dikkate alacağız bundan sonra değerlendirirken. Arkada bir beyefendi vardı. Bir de hemen sağda papyonlu bir beyefendi vardı. O da söz istemişti. Lütfen.
Teşekkür ediyorum.
Onu da unutmayalım. Evet.
Tarihin
Buyurun.
sıfır noktasında mimari bir yapı görüyoruz. Tasarım kültürünün geliştiği, belirleyicisinin. Şimdi bunun mimarı kim? Yani bu ortada sıfır, hem sıfır noktası var hem bir mimari eser var. Mimarına ilişkin veya nasıl o bilgi gelişmiş, buna ilişkin bir veri var mıdır? Teşekkür ediyorum.
Buyurun sayın konuşmacılarımız.
First of all, to this term zero point in time. I don't agree with this term, obviously. I mean, I'm an archaeologist. I know that the zero point in time, when should that be? Is that the Big Bang? Is that, for me, as I said, we have to see Gobeklitepe in its context, and that is within the Neolithic, which is preceded by the Paleolithic, which is, divided into the upper and middle and old Paleolithic. I mean, this is a long-term, since forever. So I have problems with the term 0 point in time, but of course you have to realize that I think this is more of a marketing effort than anything else. The other question regarding the architecture, of course, we heard the comment just now about kings, and of course this thing about the who designed. Obviously, these buildings appear to be designed to a plan. We have to accept that there was probably someone that had some sort of say within society who actually sort of could influence or decided in a way what was going to happen. And of course, we do expect that these societies, these hunter-gatherer, sedentary hunter-gatherer societies, they were evolving. I mean, I mentioned incipient hierarchization. That we do have evidence for that. Perhaps in the grave. Well, we don't have graves, apparently, unfortunately, at Gobeklitepe. But later on, grave goods is a way of seeing hierarchical sort of social differentiation within groups. But I think what we have at Gobeklitepe is really an incipient phase of this hierarchization, and what we could be seeing here, obviously. I think the term that's used quite frequently is big men, or big women, in fact, why not? Which is like someone within the group who, for reasons, be it because they're a skilled hunter, or they have knowledge of certain of the rituals or of the history of the group, they're using this knowledge to exert some sort of power or influence. So I don't think we can see it, as I said, not as sort of kings, etc. That comes much later, but we have within the group some sort of incipient hierarchization, and I think the big people, the big men, the big women, may have had some influence as to how these buildings were constructed.
Inspiring speech, Dr. Lee. Thanks to you. As you said, we know that some places in this region has some evidence of being living areas like Neolithic, and we know that Gobeklitepe is a remote place in this region, and you have found some evidence and skulls in this rectangular shaped buildings that can be the graveyards of these living the people lives in this area, and you said that the shapes in this area can tell us stories about their culture. So here comes this question in our minds: can these places, the tombstones of the people that are living in that area, like the important people's tombstones, can be the structures, like, because we have 3 layers of this structure layout, and we see that there is always 2 main big monuments in the middle of them, and we think both of them are male, but personally I think that one of them can be a woman. And you said that we found 3 skulls, and 2 of them were female, and one of them was male. So can these stones be the tombstones of important people living in that area?
Okay, thanks for your question. Previously, Klaus Schmidt always said that these buildings, or the symbolism, could be related to death. You know, the snakes, the vultures, sky burials, all of this sort of thing was discussed. And his problem was he never found any burials within these monumental buildings. I mean, if these are burial tombs, whatever, we would expect to find a body, or at least an orthostat, or we'd have some sort of evidence that something related to death. And it's only in a symbolism. Physical bones of human beings, we haven't actually found, only the fragments. As we now realize, you mentioned the 3 phases, and it's going into detail now, but the 3 phases of the site, layer 1, 2, 3, we don't believe in those phases anymore. They're no longer valid for our research, because we've realized where Klaus Schmidt originally said the buildings were ritually backfilled and buried, personified like dead people. We now realize what happened is the houses around the buildings, the monumental buildings, they actually collapsed and slid in. So what we have filling those buildings is in fact the slope slide, and it's all mixed material. Old burials from beneath house floors has been intermingled. It's been sort of crunched up, as it were, in this slide event, or events, plural. And for this reason, I don't think we're looking at buildings related to burials, but of course, indirectly, through the symbolism, through the beliefs and the rituals, and this whole thing that I was talking about, the narrative, of course it is somehow present. So, yeah, I think that answers, or could answer your question.
Hanımefendi.
Okay. Hello.
Siz kaldırdınız aslında ama neyse. Evet, okey, peki. Tamam.
Hello, this is Elif from ICP. Apologies if I missed out your speech about what I'm asking. How were those tons of stone pillars were carried and erected? Is it still unknown, or you have an explanation for that?
Well, I showed you the picture of the pillar on the plateau, and of course that's about 200, 300 meters away from the main site where these buildings were erected. But we have to imagine that people were, why go so far to quarry something? Why not quarry on the spot? So we're now thinking, Moritz Kinzel and I, my colleague, building archaeologist at the site, we're now considering whether or not in the area that is now built over, whether or not that was also a former quarry, and they're actually quarrying these large T-pillars as near as possible to the buildings where they actually erected them. But of course later on, when the site accumulated and the layers built up and the mound started to appear, then they had to go further afield, further away to quarry. But the quarries around the mound itself, so the huyuk, the settlement mound, around that there's a large area of limestone plateau where we have the quarrying activity. We have negatives of pillars of blocks that have been taken out and removed. We even have one block which is still sort of tilted upwards, ready to move out. So really another snapshot from 10,000 years ago. Fantastic stuff on the plateau. But of course, I would think the same. Why go so far to get something so big? Do it as near as possible. And of course, I mentioned also that a lot of these stones were also recycled. They weren't actually, if they're making a new building or a new building phase, because they frequently built one building inside another, like these Russian dolls, then they would take the old T-pillars and actually drag them forward and put them probably in a new position. So they were recycling as well. So, yeah.
Evet, buyurun.
Teşekkürler. Takriben 5000 yılı sonra ortaya çıkan Sümerlerle ilgili aralarında bir bağ bulunamadığı düşünülüyordu. Ben şunu sormak istiyorum, yani onlar bir kanıt buldular mı bu ilişkiye dair, yoksa o 5000 yılda hayat durmuş değildir, tabii bir ilişki vardır mutlaka, ama bir sonuca varıldı mı bu anlamda?
Any remarks?
Okay, now we always have to be very careful when linking Göbeklitepe to other periods, especially to sites like Stonehenge, the Maltese temples, etc., and Easter Island. But of course, the Sumerians are a lot nearer. But still, there's a large gap, time gap between that. Of course, we can't rule out that there were some links, which I don't know. It's difficult to grasp them. But there are links within the Neolithic. If you look at places like Çatalhöyük, we have the agglomerative building that we're seeing at Gobeklitepe is also seen at ASSOC. It's seen at Çatal later on, of the domestic buildings. Interestingly, though, when Gobeklitepe was abandoned around 8000 BC, they stopped making these monumental buildings, and the ritual, as it were, that you have in the monumental buildings at Gobeklitepe seems to go into the domestic area, into the small houses, like at Çatalhöyük. There is continuity there. We have similar we have a wonderful carving of an aurochs that's been hunted it's actually an engraving on a T-pillar at Gobeklitepe. Very similar, in fact, to wall paintings at Çatalhöyük. So we know that sort of bull baiting, bull hunting, aurochs hunting was still, practiced 2,000 years later, at Çatalhöyük. We can't rule out that there were links, but of course, archaeologically, they're very difficult to grasp.
Evet, son bir soru alıyoruz ve kapatıyoruz efendim. Hanımefendi siz kaldırdınız, buyurun.
Çok teşekkür ediyoruz bu aydınlatıcı panel için. Göbeklitepe'nin zemininin su geçirmez olduğu söyleniyor. Bu konudaki görüşlerinizi isteyecektim. Gerçekten su geçirmez mi? O dönemde böyle bir mühendisliği nasıl düşünmüşler? Yoksa Göbeklitepe Nuh'un gemisinin taştan hali mi?
Wow.
Now the floors, I showed you building D with the lovely decorated T-pillar of the human form. Building C and building D, the floors of these buildings is the actual limestone plateau itself, which has been carefully smoothed. So there's no artificial floor in that. In building B, we have evidence for a plaster floor, often called a terrazzo floor, which might have involved the burning of limestone to achieve quicklime, and then the construction of a false or an artificial hard rock floor. But I think we need new analyses of these. It's never been actually analysed in the past. We're doing that at the moment to see if it is actually a terrazzo or whether it's perhaps a normal plaster floor. But that's details. Now the buildings, of course, this is a technology. They're putting so much work into these buildings. And if they are using terrazzo, that is something very impressive, because, of course, it implies high temperatures and at a time when not even making pottery. So, this is, but these terrazzo floors are quite frequent in the Levant as well at this time, PPNA, PPNB period. So it's one of those things that it's difficult to explain. As for Noah's Ark, I don't think so. Sorry. I hate to disappoint you.
Evet, güzel bir cevap. Teşekkürler. Efendim, kapatıyorum. Hepimiz biliyoruz ki konuyla ilgilenenler, Göbeklitepe'de en önemli hususlardan biri de bu alanla ilgili bir ciddi koruma stratejisinin geliştirilmesi. Eğer bu hemen yapılamıyor ise, ki şu anda yok bildiğim kadarıyla, bu orijinal kabartmaların müzeye alınıp yerine kopyalarının koyulması, aksi takdirde burada ciddi bir sıkıntı, bir zarar söz konusu olabilir. Ben eminim ki oradaki donanımlı ekip bunlara duyarlı. yağıştan ziyade rüzgarla gelen kum bombardımanı şeklinde bir başka sorun var. Hali hazırdaki çatıların bunu engellemesi olanaklı gözükmüyor. Dolayısıyla bu da herhalde ivedilikle bu alanın korunması için ele alınması gereken konulardan biri olacaktır diye düşünüyorum öncelikle, ya da alınmasını temenni ediyorum. Ben bu çerçevede hem Sayın CLARE hem de Sayın Maner'e bu kısa süre içerisinde yapmış oldukları 2 başarılı sunum ve bu güzel sorulara verdikleri tatmin edici cevaplar için huzurlarınıza teşekkür ediyorum. Sağ olun, var olun. Evet, buyurun. Nasıl? Peki.
Thank you to our moderator and the panelists for taking us to a journey in the history. Değerli panelistlerimize çok teşekkür ediyoruz. May I kindly now invite Board Member of International Cooperation Platform, Ali Ertenü, to present a plaque of honor to our distinguished guests. Değerli konuklarımıza plaket takdimimiz olacak. Yönetim Kurulu üyesi Ali Ertenü kendilerine plaket takdiminde bulunacak. Değerli misafirler, bir sonraki panelimiz ve zirvemizin son paneli ile devam ediyor olacağız. Ladies and gentlemen, we're moving on with our last panel entitled New Trends in Higher Education. Değerli misafirlerimiz, bir sonraki ve son panelimizle devam ediyoruz. Dear guests, we're moving on with our last panel entitled New Trends in Higher Education. I would like to invite our moderator and the panelists to take their seats. Our moderator for the session is Professor İlter Turan, Honorary Board Member of International Cooperation Platform.